Thank you for being here tonight. It's a busy night. There's a lot going on in Tucson and at the U of A. We have a lot of events that are really talking about our community, preservation history, et cetera, et cetera. But I really appreciate your presence here tonight to learn more about what we do, and also we're really proud to share the work of our faculty members with the community, and in particular work that is attempting to create an impact in the community and to change, as our video said, the way that we're doing things locally and beyond our communities. And it is really my pleasure to direct the Conference Center. We're a 5-year-old organization at the University of Arizona under the Office for Research and Discovery. And we thrive on the idea of putting together people that normally don't talk to each other. And in this case, Dr. Anita Bubble, who is a consumer scientist and management scholar. She's also an expert in digital retailing and service delivery, as well as workable diversity. She has been studying millennial engagement in collaborative consumption for the past several years as co-director of the Consumers, Environment, and Sustainability Initiative. She recently founded Sharing Tribes, LLC, to develop and market an employee sustainability program for the millennial workplace, who's going to be the workplace that's going to sustain us all. She was previously on the faculty at Southern Methodist University and Georgetown University. Prior to her academic career, she worked as a product development engineer for Procter & Gamble. And before I pass the microphone to Dr. Bhapphu, I also want to emphasize this connection that we're trying to do, not only between the colleges of arts, humanities, and social sciences, but other faculty members working on important issues on campus. And I also want to underscore the emphasis of Dr. Bhapphu's work on diversity and community. That's crucial in terms of the efforts we're trying to do at the U of A. And with that, please help me welcome Dr. Anita Bubble.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out on a lovely Thursday evening and joining me here. And I hope to keep you engaged for about 45 minutes if I can stay on time and leave plenty of time for Q&A at the other end. I've been told I have to stick to this corner, so I will try my best not to wander, but I'm known to wander out of boxes all the time. So this wouldn't be any different than what I normally do. So with that said, I'm really excited today to talk to you about a journey essentially that I've been on since about 2010. And I will start on this journey with you and go rather quickly through it, but walk you through content and insights and understanding that I myself acquired along this path, and end up with the startup and give you a little bit more insights about what we're doing there. But I really wanted to take a step back and kind of walk through how I got here and maybe help you walk with me. So if you get lost along the way, please, yell, put your hand up. There's a very bright light here, so I may not see it. Just shout Anita, but I'll probably hear, and I will stop and make sure you're coming along with us on this journey, and then I will answer all questions I can, or at least try, on the other end. So if that sounds good, we're going to get started. All right. So Don't Buy, Share reflects two-part journey for me. The first one started with Don't Buy. And really, given that I'm situated in the Retailing and Consumer Sciences program at the U of A, the kind of pivotal moment for retail was back in 2011, around this time, basically Black Friday, which is in advance of or right after Thanksgiving, when Patagonia, a company I think many of you know because I've noticed some Patagonia product in the room, Patagonia took out a page-long ad in the New York Times with their most popular jacket and said, "Don't buy this jacket." And that was a very, important and somewhat turning point in retail where people had to sit back and say, "What? What do you mean don't buy? You're a retailer. What are you talking about?" And Patagonia really put on the table an issue that until that point had been sort of pushed under the rug, which is that we, especially in the US, have a problem. And that problem is related to how much we consume. But we have been taught as good citizens that it is our job to consume. And essentially, that other type of, ideal or identity is more prevalent than what Patagonia was pushing that day. So let's take a step back and talk about what Patagonia was trying to inform us about. And the first thing Patagonia pointed out was that we need to not buy. We need to reduce how much we're buying, not recycle, but actually stop buying, because right now as a planet, and this is a global statistic, we are consuming 1.5 planets worth of natural resources to keep up with our demands for consumption. And this reflects consumption that is needed, physical in nature, food and so forth, but it also reflects a lot of consumption that is not quote unquote necessary. And Patagonia went a step further in their Common Threads initiative and highlighted that they themselves were going to stop pushing product that essentially was ending up in the garbage. And they were going to start pushing product that they felt was a longer term investment. So buy good, reduce how much you buy, repair the good things you own, and after you've repaired them, reuse them, and then think about recycling. So recycling was much further down in the priority. And part of the kind of underpinnings of our consumption problem in America in particular that Patagonia was trying to point out is that while this average number is startling, the number of planets that we would need if everybody consumed like we do, meaning we in America, is even that much more startling. So take a guess. How many planets today, knowing that on average in the world we need 1.5 right now to keep up with our needs, how many planets would the world need today if everybody consumed like Americans? All right, well good, you're on the high side, so we're in the right direction. The reality is 5. So we would need 5 planets right now if everybody consumed like we do. And we clearly don't have 5 planets. And this notion of ecological overspending is represented each year by a date called the Earth Overshoot Day. And this year, that was August 13th. So right now, we are essentially spending and consuming with a bank account, an ecological bank account that's in the red. And it's not going to get refilled until the next year, but we are way behind in terms of where we are. So the call was to take a look for us at the U of A and as part of the Consumers Environment and Sustainability Initiative and ask the question, how are Americans making sense of all the sort of sustainability messaging coming at them, all the green product options, and yet we're still at this place. How can we help educate or even maybe create tools to try to reverse this trend? And I'm not the only one working on this, as you can well imagine. So let's start with some more startling statistics, because consumption is costing us more than just our environmental health. So one very unknown statistic is that 44% of all greenhouse gas emissions that the US is responsible for globally are related to the production and consumption of manufactured goods. That's more than all of heating and cooling and transportation. And we hear a lot about heating and cooling and transportation, but we're not hearing the message that don't buy actually might be more impactful. And so that in itself is a statistic that many people are trying to push out. The other sad fact about our lives in America is that we are essentially stuff rich and cash poor. In fact, Bloomberg, I believe it was a week ago, issued an interesting viewpoint that said and showed that the current economic recovery, unlike all other previous expansions of the economy, is being driven by the consumption of unnecessary goods. In fact, that statistic itself is telling in that the only reason we've had any kind of economic recovery to note is because we're buying things we don't need. So take heart. And the other part of this is the huge self-storage industry that reflects where all the stuff we buy goes. It's a startling statistic, and most of the people who use that 2 billion square feet of self-storage are homeowners with garages. So these are not people who don't have homes and storage. These are homeowners with garages. They represent roughly 45% of that 2 billion square feet. So just in terms of why don't buy, there are lots of signs around our need to really look at the issue and think about ways to reduce how much we purchase. Another, I think, hopeful set of statistics is that most Americans today actually recognize that we have a problem. So this says that 70% of Americans feel that we are responsible for the world's environmental problems due to our consumption. 91% believe that the way we live produces too much waste. And 85% think that we need to make some major changes. So I think that that's good news that we don't have our heads stuck in the sand. And that is, again, a point where we have opportunity. At least that's how I'm framing it and my colleagues doing this work. So what I want to show you is if we accept that we have a problem, then what can we do about it? This is a short video by the Center for the New American Dream, and it's Tim Cass's work. Tim is a psychologist, quite well known in the positive psychology, environmental psychology area. So if we could play that. So I asked myself, what can I do to help my students build a life around intrinsic values? My retail students, just my students in general at the U of A. And what we decided to do as part of CESI was to start an undergrad class. It's the general education class that any student on campus could take or is required to take as part. Those types of classes they're required to take as part of their degree curriculum, and talk to students about these issues. So we started this class, and I started teaching the class in 2011, that spring. And aside from showing statistics and videos and really talking to them about why we consume, first understanding why is it that we are driven to buy, then talking through what is the impact of that action, that buying action, environmentally, socially, economically, globally. That's what we talk about. And the last part was really delving into some of the emerging options in the marketplace to try to think of other ways to consume or be a consumer. And along that path, I got a ton of insights from the discussions and the reflections with students around this whole idea of how to implement some of the recommended changes that Tim talks about in his video. So as I go through this next part, I'm going to come back to those insights and sort of highlight to you my sense-making around some of these data. So the first piece of the puzzle is that at the same time that we were teaching the class, I was teaching the class and we were talking about these issues, the so-called sharing economy started to get a lot of attention. There's a lot of media coverage of it. So I started studying the sharing economy. And there were similarly other pieces of data then issued later, but I'm going to reflect on them here. This data reflects what I heard in my classroom from my students, which is that many of the students, and the statistic is 1 in 3 Americans think that by sharing what we already have, we can reduce how much we need to buy. So just the principle of sharing is caring. And in particular, we weren't talking about cars and houses, because those are two things that many students don't actually own. At least not freshmen in my class. We were talking about all the other things that we buy that surround our lives and our day-to-day activities, so the household domain. My students clearly saw that there was a positive effect for the environment if we were to increase the utility of existing goods, somehow figure out how to share what we have so we don't all have to buy a power drill. In fact, the statistics on power drills and their usage are pretty scary. There are many, many power drills in the US that are used, maybe for about 10 minutes each year, but we have lots of them. So if everybody caught their power drill and shared it, we'd have a lot less need for the power drills in question. But clearly they saw the environmental piece. But interestingly, being that they were and are millennials, they really focused in on 2 other aspects of the sharing practice, which are reflected in this data across all US citizens or Americans in general, is that they saw it as a way also to be able to consume on much less money, because they were financially and continue to be financially pressured in our quote-unquote recovering economy. And most importantly, they saw it as a way to meet people. So if you think back to Tim's video, he talked about how one builds intrinsic values by essentially relating to other social beings and spending time with friends, family, and neighbors. And the interesting part from the millennial students was that although they are the most digitally networked generation and they have extensive social media accounts, many of them, if not most of them, had lots of fears, concerns, and perceived barriers around meeting people face to face. They talked about how college was this special place that they were making friends, but that, it was difficult to actually go to any type of networking event. They talked about their so-called, discomfort with that engagement. And so they saw this idea of sharing and then some of the sharing economy platforms in question that they had used as a way to meet people for not necessarily a work-related reason, but a reciprocal exchange. I'm helping someone and I meet someone in this context and I might be able to build a friendship from there. So the relational piece was important to them, and it suggests it is to Americans as well. And positively, I guess, is to say that this changing consumer attitude is actually stronger in other parts of the world than it is here when it comes to people's willingness, at least self-reported willingness, to share their assets with others and willing to sort of borrow or get assets in a sharing context from others. So we see actually a lot of sharing activity around the world, and some of it is very grassroots. It doesn't look necessarily like an online platform or an app. So on that note, before I get too much more into giving you some details around the sharing economy, there's a radio clip from NPR just talking about what is it. And I'm really pushing multimedia here. That was the call, so on cue. So from a retailer perspective, what is this peer-to-peer network? What is this sharing economy? And I think there are a couple of thoughts I want you to hold. The first one is that what we've essentially done or are doing in the sharing economy is crowdsourcing the goods, the inventory, the things that essentially provide the service or provide you with the experience that you're seeking. And that idea of crowdsourcing is here and has been here for a while. So it seems like it's sort of a maturation of an idea from a different space coming here to this space. If you think of the roots of the internet itself, the whole idea of crowdsourcing what you need just in time when you need it is part and parcel of these peer-to-peer sharing networks. The other piece here is decentralization, right? Everybody can be a retailer. Everybody can be a service provider. There are platform businesses, and I will mention a few of them soon, who facilitate that connection online, but it doesn't have to be online. It can be non-mediated. It's the same idea. But those are kind of two essential pieces of why the sharing economy is different from traditional retail, where the retail supply chain controls the hierarchy of where you get what you get, and quite frankly is also very much a sourced environment where all the risk and rewards are managed by a very centralized set of players. So in that way, the sharing economy is not surprising, because we've seen those types of reorganizations, organizationally speaking, in other sectors and other areas of our general lifestyle markets. So when we think about the sharing economy, the first thing I want to point out is that there are places and spaces, even online, where we're dealing with no financial exchange. This is the domain of the gift, the reciprocal economy. So you have a company like Yerdle that will be essentially 2 years old this month. And it was started by a former Walmart executive and a Sierra Club leader. And their goal is to reduce the amount of goods that are consumed through purchases. And so that is essentially a platform where you put out things that you are willing to give away, and somebody else may have something they're willing to give away that you want, and that's sort of the exchange context that we're talking about. There are no dollars being traded here. It's not a transaction. Then you have Tucson-born Free Cycle, which has been around for some time. And again, this is about passing on the goods and keeping them alive, not necessarily sharing them in the more traditional borrow-lend context, but nonetheless considered within the umbrella of the sharing economy. And then more recently, there has been this very popular Facebook-driven movement called the Buy Nothing movement, which has globally taken hold, where groups of neighbors or community members belong to these Facebook groups. I belong to one in town. And essentially people put out things that they're willing to give away for free, and other people ask for what they need. And the idea is that we're able to maybe meet those needs and reincorporate other people's waste in our own lives as having value. So these are operating mediated, but without any kind of financial transaction. And you don't hear much about them. What you do hear about are the so-called poster children of the sharing economy. These are 17 sharing economy companies, all mediated by technology. So they're platforms where buyers and sellers or providers and customers meet. They're all valued at 1 billion or more. And 10 of them are considered unicorn companies in that they have, growth potential that rivals the best of the best in terms of startup. What's interesting is they are primarily driven in the verticals of lodging and we see them in the verticals of transportation. There are a few in financial services in terms of money lending, and then we have a couple of the quote-unquote goods areas. But the large majority of them started up in California, but they're not just a US phenomenon. You're seeing them around the world. And as a collective, these companies to date have received $15 billion in funding. Many of them are not making any money yet, so they're essentially a bet, right? But the point is that they have acquired market valuations because they have acquired humongous amounts of consumers who are using their services. And that's essentially what's driving some of these valuations. So with that, though, come the concerns. And on the NPR video, on the NPR slip, the snippet, there were some interesting points made, but there have been more recently some organized groups of municipalities who are working hard to try to more collectively and more thoughtfully think about how to address some of the downsides of the sharing economy. Some of those being noted as tax evasion, some of those being noted, that's in the lodging case, and then as many of you probably know, in the case of Uber and some of the transportation companies, the whole issue around employee status, right? And then beyond that, there are also concerns that in the local context, there is value being actually taken out from the local markets. So there are quite a lot of resources and interesting projects around this, and I'd be happy to give you information on them with respect to the concerns. I actually focused on the consumer concerns, and these were concerns that came up in my discussion with students and with community consumers at large, which is that for most people, renting or sharing in a more traditional borrow-lend sense with someone I don't know is very uncomfortable. And that the largest barriers that we see are trust related. Roughly, 75% of what is documented are trust issues. I'm not sure that I can trust the person. I'm not sure that this person won't do me harm. It's those types of issues. So thinking through that and that challenge, I actually was challenged by a student in my class that was the inspiration for the startup to really think about how do we address the concerns, try to maximize the three-prong value, the connect value, the economic and the environmental value, not just the economic value, and put what I know about selling things to people to buy and apply it to the sharing practice. And there were 3 insights that led to Sharing Tribes, the startup. The first one was that if we truly bring the price of the transaction to 0 and make it a social exchange, so we go back to borrow and lend, not rent, we will increase the amount of people who will participate in the sharing practice and the sharing economy. And in order to help people not only connect, but get over the trust issue and barrier, the key insight was, why are we not sharing as communities, as private social networks, as organizations, in the collectives we already belong to? Because we are already members of those collectives, and if we could find a way to just bring the sharing practice to existing collectives, not only it gives people a sense of security and safety that these are real people who are like me, belong to the organization I'm part of, be it my church, my neighborhood, my employer context, but also I have a way to connect with them. And these are the local people I want to meet. Those are the intrinsic relationships that we need to be able to counter our materialistic, our materialistic instincts. And then importantly, that's where the issue of well-being comes in, because well-being is something that lots of people are talking about as a better measure to think of quality of life. So I did work in this domain. That led to the concept behind Sharing Tribes, and I'm just going to summarize it here as a business, which is we focused on organizations, on those collectives as our customers, and trying to figure out why and how would they be willing to support creating a sharing microeconomy within their particular organization, or a micro market inside where people could borrow and lend. We zeroed in through a lot of research on the idea of employee benefits with respect to the millennial workplace. There's some very interesting employee engagement statistics, or the lack thereof in the workplace, that we looked at. And that's where our business model ended up, where we were focused on the organization at a B2B type, a business-to-business relationship, where they would provide this platform that we are building, and the practice would be incorporated in their community and or organization. The one thing that was tough when we were working through this is, as a community organizer myself, I didn't want to lock up my idea in the corporate world. And I struggled with that tremendously, trying to figure out, how do I create a viable business as the good business professor that I am, but yet provide value to community groups and places where, the business model and the pricing would not work. And that's where the Tom Shoes idea came from, or the idea behind Tom Shoes of buy one and give one. And that is the model that we're going to market with, where the companies or the organizations that buy a subscription to our platform essentially then sponsor one organization or community group that may not be able to afford it. And we don't have that nailed down, in that we figured the paying customers may want to provide that to somebody or some group that they're already familiar with, but we may assist them through some type of city relationships and or relationships with local schools that we might create. So that's where we're going with that. Insofar as it's a marketplace to use within private social networks and organizations, it is, as you can imagine, app-driven. We have ways to not only incorporate goods, but also services, because there were several students in my class that pointed out the irony that insofar as we require people to offer up some items before they can borrow from the collective, what if you didn't have anything, right? And we're trying not to get you to buy. So we don't want you to go out and buy 3 things to be able to participate in the platform. I didn't have that solution. I turned around in class and said, well, why don't we break out for 10 minutes and come think about it? And they came back with the solution and said, well, what if we could give our time? And I thought, there you go. That's a great idea. So you can put up your skills, your volunteer time that you spend anyway, and if you're underemployed, like many millennials are, then this is a way to showcase and maybe do what you love. And in return for that time and service you provide, there are many people like me who are not a millennial who would gladly give you my stuff as far as the borrow part, and be able to try to create exchanges here. We don't do tit for tat. It is very much a pay it forward system, so that I am giving to you with the hope and the goal that in the future, when I need, someone in the collective will give to me. And we work through that pay it forward reciprocal exchange on the platform and the app. It's incorporated in some of our gratitude notifications. And it's a pretty traditional looking application. So what I do have, I wanted to point out, this is my last piece here, is there is a booklet on tables. And while there are lots of technical documents on the tables, I think the booklet really speaks to the stories that I heard and tried to incorporate when designing this product with the team that I'm working with. And so it walks you through a couple of scenarios, but Jose, for example, has a garage full of tools. Tools that he's holding on to because they remind him of the days that he worked in construction with his dad and his brother. But he doesn't get to use those tools anymore because he's busy doing a pretty 9-to-5 or maybe a 9-to-9 job in a managerial type of job, and he has a family. So his company, signs up for Sharing Tribes, and he decides to put some of those tools out there and offer them up to lend out to people in his company. At the same time, Jose's wife, Olivia, is worried about her husband. She wants him to take a break. He's been working really hard and has had no family time. And so Olivia says, why don't we take a quick camping trip? Let's take the 2 kids, go out, get in nature, get a few days away. But she doesn't want to go out and buy stuff like a tent and sleeping bags and all this stuff that she knows is going to collect dust. And they don't need to waste their money on that. So she uses the tool to borrow those from somebody named Daniel, who has a garage full of sporting goods. But Daniel is a new home buyer. He just bought a home. He saved up his down payment driving Uber for a while as his second job. And now he has no time and very little money, but all he does is spend his free time and money on his new house that he's trying to fix up. So he goes online and he sees that he can borrow some tools, some of Jose's tools that he had listed. And he also decides to post a request to get some help with painting on the weekend because he's got to finish painting the upper floor. Later that week, Najla and Lily, who were college roommates, and they usually volunteer once a month, went on to the app. They still all work for the same company. And they saw Daniel's request for help with paint, and so they signed up to help him on the weekend. And when they get together on that Saturday to get the painting done, they all discovered that aside from wearing the white t-shirt and the jeans that they all showed up in, which I think is funny because that's what the stock photo shows, they all have a love for soccer. And they work for the same company, so they decide to get together and kind of organize a outing at the company level for people to attend the next soccer game in town. So that's the type of experience that we're looking to create with the app. And in terms of who's helping me on that journey, I think we've gone through what we do here, so I'm going to skip over this slide. These are my teammates, all my sort of partners in crime that I convinced to join the madness, and one of whom is here. Jack is here. He came down from Phoenix. We are a virtual team, and essentially we'll be beta testing our application in January and this spring with hopefully a group of about 10 different types of organizations. Considered private beta testing, trying to make sure we not only work out the kinks, but we understand what's working for our customers and the users in their organizations. So if you have an organization you think might be a good beta tester, then you should let us know. We are obviously talking and have some on our sort of list, but we're open to incorporating a few more. And we're also very actively raising money to get to market. We've been self-funded up to this point, but the budget is growing in terms of need, but that's where we're at this point. So on all fronts, thank you very much for listening, and now I will take whatever questions we have.
Thank you very much. I have been an avid non-consumer for many years. Banned the plastic bag down in Bisbee, so I'm very against single-use disposable things such and such. I just tried to log on and download the app, and it didn't work. So that was depressing, but I'm excited for when it does. Have you noticed while teaching the students the excitement that they have for this new economy or the new way of working and doing things like that?
So a couple of things. Our app will not be available sort of generally for people to download. You have to be part of an organization that's signed up as a collective, and then we send you access because you're part of that private group. So it's a slightly different take than the normal download for the public, although if you are part of one of the groups that signs up as a collective, you will be able to download from an app store. And I think this is an important point that I want to make before I answer your student question, which is one of the reasons a lot of consumers walk away from existing sharing economy platforms, especially those that deal with household goods and the sort of domain of things that we're dealing with, is when they get to those platforms, there's nothing there. Unless you're in an area where, there's a high level of consumer adoption at one time, you log on thinking, oh, I want to share, I've done this myself, let me see if I can borrow something, and there's really nothing there. So from a retail perspective, and this was my lens, you would never open a store without stuff on the shelves. And this is no different. You're not buying, but this is really no different from a consumer perspective. You are shopping for what you need. And so in order to kind of fix that problem, when we bring on collectives, we literally fill the store or before we open it. And there's a sort of onboarding process. So it's not one consumer at a time, it's one collective at a time, so that there's enough things that are available. So when you go look, you find at least more or less what you want. And there are ways for you to kind of request what you need and engage people. So we've had to work very hard on those problems that exist with respect to current apps. But when we talk about students and sort of the sharing economy in general, yes, the students are very excited at the opportunity. I will say that I don't believe in the long run they have very different aspirations than most other generations. Even research would suggest that. But I think in how they reach those aspirations, the sort of newer millennial generation of consumers and employees in particular have very different views around how they want to structure their life to get to those end goals. And that, I think, means that they see opportunity in being more flexible and having more decentralized lives by taking advantage of these types of opportunities, both in terms of work, but also in terms of consuming. Other questions? And I'll just walk around. Yes?
So where's the balance between the consumer economy and the sharing economy?
So right now, as far as retail is concerned, this is an interesting blip. I mean, when we've engaged our retail partners, and we have very esteemed retail partners in our program around thinking about how they might incorporate some of these ideas and change their business model, in 2010, they thought we were weird and laughed. Last year, I heard several notable CEOs talk about how they're thinking about incorporating the sharing economy. So we've made some progress in that they're looking at it with a bit of worry and saying, how is this going to affect me? But I think the American consumer hasn't hiccuped enough for them to worry yet. They're at least making sales that look under the radar or above the radar fairly decent. So I think that right now it's not penetrating retail in the traditional spaces in any major way. But I don't think that that retail can sit around doing nothing very long. And in fact, if we're successful, then we hope to change retail. That's how we look. We don't see our competition as all the other sharing economy platforms. In fact, there's a more collaborative sort of view of how we can learn from one another. But really, how do we get under and from within to disrupt retail? And I think that's the opportunity. So I was inspired by another film that I watched in preparing the class called Consumed. It's available on Amazon Prime for free. In the belly of the beast, that's what it's called. And in that movie, somewhere in that hour-long discussion about our evolutionary psychology reasons for consuming, that's what it's about. There was a gentleman in the movie that said, the hope is that someone who's in the belly of the beast will disrupt the beast. And I feel like I couldn't be better situated in the best retailing program, arguably in the country, to take on the challenge. So that was part of the inspiration.
I'm wondering, what are you doing to connect in terms of the marketing side to cultural attitudes? A lot of the stuff that you presented to me, it reminded me of barrio economics. It's still happening here in Tucson and throughout the Southwest, where we are sharing all these things. It is happening. We are building homes and and fences and roofs and trading throughout. So do you have a marketing plan that can look at that particular consumer, which is $1.2 trillion in consumer spending, which are Latinos in the USA, and Tucson being 42% Mexican American? I mean, what are some of those strategies that you have to those cultural values?
So thankfully, I have a doctoral minor in cultural anthropology, and I did grow up in Pakistan to a family that was half Portuguese, Indian, and half Iranian, and I married and now divorced a Nigerian. So I have pretty good sense of cultural values around the world. In that, when I worked for P&G, I worked in product development for international markets, the developing markets, and I think what I feel right now with respect to sharing tribes and the plan is, if we can crack the U.S. market, that's the linchpin. The American consumer is the least likely, partly because they consume the most, to be on board. But culturally speaking, and the word tribes was very important to me not to give up. I got a lot of pushback initially with that word, but it harkens to the fact that the practice that we are trying to facilitate and promote is something we all know, because it's how we lived in our not so recent past, but also for many cultures currently, that's how we still live in collectives and share. And so I think that the practice itself maps quite well onto what I would call more traditional cultural values. And I think that I could imagine seeing more engagement among sort of first generation even, or immigrant communities here, who might look at this as something that not only they get, but they're used to doing. It just helps them be more efficient. So I definitely think that our focus on the US market is to prove that we can take on the biggest hurdle. And insofar as we learn how to do that, I think we'll be able to translate this around the world. It's really important, because if everybody in China and India, they all aspire to consume like we do, if they start consuming in any fashion close to what we do, we won't have a planet. It'll be January 2nd when we run out of resources, not August 15th. So I think that the kind of the rewards are really great, and the risks are really great to drive people to look at this. And in fact, I think there's more governmental level thinking and organizing around the world than there is here. I mean, the European Union, even Seoul, Korea is a sharing city. The premier of China has talked about how he wants to make sure that he creates sharing city type environments in China as they build out. So they're thinking about it and actually doing some planning. We're not doing anything yet in any kind of organized national sense. Other questions? Right there.
Can you say some more about how to address the lenders' concerns about risk?
So, what are lenders' concerns? I heard a lot of people telling me stories about how their stuff went walking, as in they lent it out and they didn't know where it was, and when they needed it, it wasn't there because people didn't return it on time. So there are a fair amount of concerns around being a good borrower in that sense. And on the app we've developed, most apps take you to the good and then send you to figure out the coordination. We actually coordinate. We have schedulers, we have check-ins, so we're tracking that good through the transaction, or in our case, the exchange. And we send reminders to people of their commitment. When you borrow, you actually have to declare a date you're going to return it. And then we prompt you, you're supposed to be doing this tomorrow, returning this item, or this item is due. So there's some of that already built in. What's not built into the app, and what we are working on, is what I would call some type of property damage type insurance. And that is interesting. So here's kind of the take on property damage insurance. In the domain of rental, real estate or sharing economy real estate, I have a place down in Rocky Point that I put out and rent through VRBO. And people who rent my place in Rocky Point take out a rental damage protection insurance policy for not very much. So I do believe as an academic that insurance is to the sharing economy what shipping is today to the online retail environment. I think it's fundamentally, that's the analogy. So I think insurance is going to get more and more important in terms of these types of policies as the sharing economy grows, and we're seeing that. But we, as sharing tribes, had an insurance broker go as far as Lloyd's of London to try to get a policy to even cover us for beta testing, where we could insure the lender's goods for property damage that might occur when the goods were being lent out. And we don't have that coverage yet because we have absolutely no data on what the actuarial norms are around damage itself. So we have to get through beta testing and have data on what that profile of risk looks like before we can get a policy written. That's the chicken and egg story there. But I do believe that insurance is going to not only be needed, it's going to also enable borrowers to be better risk for lenders. Think of it that way. If I'm a borrower and I'm carrying a policy, then a lender's more likely to lend it to me. In the domain of social exchange and these kind of private networks, we do have what we consider social controls working in our favor. Most people are going to take care of the stuff because these are real people they know and are connected to at work or in the neighborhood, and their relationships at risk. And quite frankly, even in the sharing economy, the overall damage statistic is rather low. You hear about the worst case stories. They're always in the media, but I think the percentage of damage in Airbnb transactions is under 10%. So that means any kind of property damage, not anything that is of significant value necessarily. So I think that it's an important question, and one that even the borrowers really care about, because the borrowers say, I'm sharing because I want to save money. I'm going to take care of the good, but crap happens. And if that crap happens on the time that I have that good, now I'm not only out the replacement cost of the good, which I'm going to have to go replace, but I'm potentially out a relationship. I have reputational damage. So we think it's going to be really important to offer borrowers that coverage, and we're just hoping that we will have some type of insurer give us an option before we get to market.